Check out Joe Manganiello's role roster. Flash Thompson, Deathstroke, Burt from Rampage, Alcide Herveau, and now Max Fist in his upcoming movie, Archenemy. But if you think you know who's a good guy and who's a bad guy on that list, think again. Let's rewind with Joe Manganiello. I like this Mohawk situation going on, Joe.
Thank you.
I'm also a fan of Mohawks, so.
I see that. Yeah, okay.
We're gonna obviously talk about Archenemy. We're gonna talk about some other stuff, like you're a huge D&D fan, some of your other roles. I was first introduced to you by watching True Blood. Very much in a lot of our minds, you were still Alcide Herveau, right? Like you're the superhero type of dude. What is your approach in kind of balancing what people expect of you and then, you know, what you truly enjoy to do in your work and your life?
Well, yeah, I understand that there are, preconceived notions about people can only be good at one thing or only be interested in one type of thing, and they have to fall into some type of archetype. But that's just not the way it is. It's not the way that the people that I always looked up to were. You take somebody like Henry Rollins, for example, who I was very much into growing up. He's a scholar, he's an author, he's a really deep writer. He's also like a crazy tattooed up, thick-necked punk guy. And I always liked that you couldn't put him into a category. And so do I try to have to balance the athletic side or the nerd side? No, I just do it all.
And that's actually a great segue to Archenemy, right? Because you are one of the producers and you're in the movie. Obviously, there are a lot of superhero movies and stories out there today. You definitely are in a couple yourself. How do you feel the movie stands out? And, what was the decision to make it?
Let's be clear. You don't know if he's a superhero or not. He babbles on and on about some other dimension, and in this other dimension, he was a champion of the people there and had powers and could fly. You hear him say that, but what really attracted me to this script was it's not a superhero movie, but it's not a superhero movie. And that's what I liked about it. It reminded me of the What If comics back in the day. It was another version of Superman Red Son. What if he landed in communist Russia instead of the US during the Cold War, even though he landed in 1938, because that's when the first Action Comics came out, whatever. In our case, it's, what if Superman landed on the wrong planet? What if instead of the gravity being lighter so that he could fly here where he couldn't on Krypton? And what if the carcinogens in the atmosphere were harmful to him breathing, and he had trouble breathing and was in pain over it? What if gravity was super heavy for him and he couldn't fly and his bones and joints felt that pain to the point where he had to drink and do drugs to try to alleviate that pain? The guy's homeless, on drugs, trying to keep away that sort of pain from being on the wrong planet, meanwhile babbling on and on about how great it was somewhere else. And then that becomes a metaphor for people that are stuck in the past and how great the past was, and they're not living in the present, or they're not making the most out of this situation. They haven't accepted that these are the cards that life has dealt them, and that's really what the movie's about. It's not about all the other stuff. It's about this borderline schizophrenic meth addict who lives under a bridge, who is somehow stuck in these glory days that may or may not have even existed.
I think that's such a really neat way, because you've had kind of your work in superheroes. Like you were in Spider-Man, you played Flash Thompson, who is a legacy character for a lot of folks who read the comic. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That was like one of your first times playing a villain. And probably the worst type of villain. Like he's a bully. Like Flash Thompson, he's just a bully.
Well, is he, or is he a cool football player, jock guy, and some nerd is now moving in on his girlfriend? It just depends on how you look at it, I think.
It's all about the messaging and the messenger. I see you.
I didn't see him as a bully. I think a bully is, you got to look at the circumstances,
So Flash eventually goes down. Your argument is that he's not a bully. Does that make Peter Parker the bully?
We'll look at Cobra Kai. I think Cobra Kai explores that exact theme.
I love it. And I love the fact that you are so passionate about all of these fandoms, and you really truly are a Marvel, DC, D&D fan. Like you get the characters. This is something that you really understand. You also played One of my favorite characters, Alcide Herveau with True Blood. How did being a fan of all of these different fandoms prepare you for playing a werewolf?
Well, I think that tapped into the young boy at night sitting alone in the living room watching the old black and white Universal monster movies. I think that's really what it tapped into more than anything else. I always felt sympathy for the monsters when I was growing up. Darth Vader was my favorite character. I mean, I wanted to be Han Solo, but I also was obsessed with Darth Vader. When Legend came out, Tim Curry as the devil, I was just obsessed with. I don't know, I want to say I rooted for the monsters or felt some sort of empathy. And the way that True Blood was written at the heart of Alcide was, this self-loathing monster who looked at being a werewolf as a curse to the point where he didn't want to have kids and things like that. So for me, it was very easy to feel sympathetic.
That's interesting because it's very much like this Grendel, Beowulf, misunderstood monster situation where you don't really know the monster side of the story type concept, which then brings me to your role as Burke in Rampage. Do you like playing bad guys? Because I also hear that in your tone is you have this gray area of what is a bad guy.
Well, I think there should be. I think those are the good ones. Other than Freddy Krueger or something that you're okay, that's evil personified. If you're not dealing with something that extreme, everybody is a shade of something, or all characters for the most part are. And especially when you get into a backstory, you get into an opportunity to show why that person is the way that they are. I think that was such a hesitation about the Joker, was there was such a outpouring of, we don't want to see the origin story. We just want him to remain this psychotic anarchist. We don't want to be sympathetic. We want him to stay super evil.
Which is really interesting because if you talk to a lot of writers, they will tell you that the best bad guys have a reason. They have a motive. They came from somewhere. Yeah. There is an origin story. I think that's why we love Lex Luthor.
But he has to be done right. You have to understand what it is that he's jealous about, what it is that bothers him, and then even Batman versus Superman, you have to justify why they would square off against each other, mm-hmm. and if that's done properly and executed right, then you get this whole other side. What I'll say is that, do I like playing bad guys? Do I like playing good guys? Do I like doing drama? Do I like doing comedy more? It's just, I like interesting parts. And a lot of times the good guy is written very bland. The hero of your story is way less interesting than the villains.
So that brings us to Deathstroke. Is that something that you feel was part of your decision to take that role?
When you kind of step into the character, I remember a lot of the talks that I had early on after being initially cast was about trying to keep him human. I don't want him to be superpowered because Batman isn't superpowered. Batman is a human with no powers who went through a traumatic experience, lost loved ones, and swore it would never happen again, and then put on this mask and this suit of armor and went out into the streets to try to create a more utopian, safe society. And on the flip side of that, you have a guy who went through a traumatic experience, lost a loved one, put on a mask, put on a suit, and went out and attempted to enact his own agenda. The only difference is, Batman uses different tactics. If he was superpowered and Batman wasn't, I think the hot air balloon just drifts away.
It feels like you know these characters as much as you know yourself. And I think that probably helps you a lot as you're developing out your D&D play as well, because you are an avid D&D player, right? This is kind of you have done this for a while. The people who love D&D and who've been lifetime D&D players really just love the story.
When it comes to, Dungeons and Dragons, the job that I wanted as a kid, I wanted to work for TSR, who was the company that created Dungeons and Dragons. When I was a kid, I wanted to work for the company. I wanted to write games. I wanted to write modules. I wanted to write adventures. So I wound up finding an outlet for that in filmmaking and in producing and in acting. But I also, over the past few years, have been fortunate enough to have been able to work that job part-time through the company of Dungeons and Dragons. So I think a lot of people say, oh, you know, you're a fan. And it's like, well, I'm an employee. I get to work that job that I wanted as a kid.
You're living your nerd dream, and I love this. And I'm really looking forward to a lot of the cool stuff. Is there anything that we should be absolutely looking forward to?
Archenemy, December 11th, in theaters and VOD, depending on how you want to skin the cat.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely great.
Sure. Thanks a lot. It was a fun interview. Thank you.